A massive cleanup begins in Durban and protests continue across China. Good afternoon, I'm Tracy Baumgard. Durban emergency personnel have begun a massive cleanup of tons of muck and debris that are clogging streets and waterways after torrential rains. eThekwini Municipality's head of communication, Thabo Mofokeng, says although several shacks and homes were submerged, the damage is not as bad as in previous storms. He says displaced people who have crowded evacuation centres have begun to trickle back to their communities as floodwaters subside.
The extent of damage was not as bad as it was last week. Very few people had to be evacuated because of the sudden rain. Our team were keeping a very close watch. All the areas that have been identified as hotspots. However, we are happy that the extent of damage was not as bad as it was last week, but we are still doing mop-up operations, and we are also still counting the costs, and we'll be able to determine the extent of the damage maybe by tomorrow.
The Gauteng Infrastructure Development Department has spent 90 million rand in interest due to late payments to service providers. MEC Nqedani Mahlangu says most construction and maintenance projects have suffered cost overruns. Mahlangu has blamed this on weak contract management by her department.
If the project was meant to last for 2 years and there's a 2 months delay or so, it pushes up the costs and the interest. Sometimes the contractor pulls out the workers on site and all of those things. So there's a combination of factors, but the amount that they've been able to quantify so far is about 90 million rands across the board in the department, including all other contracts that were entered into.
The Chamber of Mines has denied that the entire mining sector is in crisis. Spokesperson Vusi Mabena says strikes are not taking place across the sector and are restricted to platinum and possibly gold. He says the platinum industry was falling on hard times when the strike started. The Benchmarks Foundation has meanwhile criticised government, police and platinum producer Lonmin for firing rubber bullets at protesters in the Nkandla informal settlement in Marikana. Police, backed up by the army, have meanwhile blocked all marches around Marikana. ANC Secretary-General Gwede Mantashe has meanwhile said socio-economic conditions of mine workers at Lonmin's Marikana mine have partly led to their violent protest. He was speaking after a National Executive Committee meeting in Pretoria. Mantashe says mining remains the bedrock of the economy, and yet the abject poverty and squalor surrounding mining areas remain a matter of deep concern. He says mining in general have paid lip service to an undertaking in the mining charter to ensure that living and working conditions of workers are improved. 7 suspects, all teenagers, have been arrested after a 15-year-old boy was stabbed to death in Khayelitsha on the Cape Flats. Police spokesperson Andre Trout says the young men face a murder charge.
During the early hours of this morning at approximately 3 o'clock, a 15-year-old boy was stabbed to death in the Khayelitsha area. We conducted a search operation for the suspects and apprehended 7 juveniles. They will make a court appearance once they have been charged.
Further afield, anti-Japanese protests are continuing in cities across China in an escalating row over disputed islands in the East China Sea. Police have used tear gas to disperse an angry crowd in the southern city of Shenzhen, while protesters burned Japanese flags in a nearby city. The BBC's John Sudworth reports from Beijing.
The violence has flared again, with Chinese police using tear gas and water cannons to drive back anti-Japanese protesters in the southern city of Shenzhen. In Beijing, the Japanese embassy is now guarded by large numbers of riot police after becoming besieged on Saturday by demonstrators throwing rocks, bottles and eggs. In other Chinese cities, Japanese shops are reported to have been looted and car dealerships set on fire.